You know that feeling when something just doesn't sit right? Like a whisper of dread in your gut that you can't explain? That's how I felt the night we used the Ouija board. It started innocently enough, as most bad decisions do. My roommate, Evan, found an old Ouija board while cleaning out his uncle's attic. He brought it home, grinning like he'd won the lottery. The thing was ancient, made of real wood, and smelled faintly of mildew. The planchette had carvings on it, symbols I'd never seen before. "Dude," I said, shaking my head, "this thing looks like it came straight out of a horror movie." "Exactly," Evan said, setting it on the coffee table. "Perfect for a Friday night scare." Joining us were Evan's girlfriend, Lisa, and my coworker, Jake. We were 4 bored 20-somethings looking for cheap thrills. None of us believed in the supernatural. We laughed about it as we dimmed the lights and lit a single candle for effect. The tiny flame cast long, flickering shadows that danced on the walls. That should have been my first warning. "Who wants to go first?" Evan asked, his voice dripping with mock seriousness. We all hesitated, looking at each other. Finally, Jake shrugged. "Whatever, I'll do it." The 4 of us placed our fingers on the planchette. Evan smirked. "Spirits, is anyone there?" he said in a dramatic voice. Nothing happened. Not at first. Then the planchette began to move. "Come on. Who's messing around?" Lisa asked, laughing nervously. "I'm not doing it," Jake said, his voice higher-pitched than usual. I knew Jake well enough to tell he wasn't lying. The planchette spelled out, "Yes." The air felt heavier. I could feel it pressing against my skin, like humidity before a storm. "Who are you?" Evan asked. The planchette moved again, faster this time. "Mark." "Mark," Lisa repeated. "Is that your name?" "Yes." "What do you want?" Jake asked, his voice trembling. "GLP." The candle flickered violently, and a shiver ran down my spine. The air wasn't just heavy, it was cold. The room felt wrong, like the walls were closing in. "Help with what?" I blurted out, my voice cracking. The planchette jerked, spelling LETMEOUT. "What does that mean?" Lisa whispered. She was gripping Evan's arm now, her knuckles white. "Guys," Evan said, trying to sound confident but failing miserably. "It's just a game. Someone's pushing it." "Nobody's pushing it," Jake snapped. This is not normal." Before we could say anything else, the candle went out. The room plunged into darkness. We scrambled to turn on the lights. When they flickered back on, the board was different. The letters and numbers looked rearranged, distorted somehow. And the planchette? It was on the word goodbye. "That's it," I said, standing up. "We're done." But as I turned to leave, something caught my eye. A shadow on the far wall. It wasn't ours. It was shaped like a person, tall and gaunt, with unnaturally long fingers. It didn't move. "Did anyone else see that?" Lisa whispered, her voice barely audible. We all nodded, too scared to speak. Then the shadow moved. It didn't walk. It glided unnaturally smooth, from one side of the room to the other. Evan grabbed the board and planchette, shoving them back into the box. "We're throwing this thing out," he said, his voice shaking. But it wasn't that simple. Even after we got rid of the board, burning it, in fact, things didn't go back to normal. I started waking up at exactly 3 a.m. every night, the same time we'd used the board. My room always felt colder at that hour, no matter how high I turned up the heat. One night, I woke up to find the shadow standing at the foot of my bed. I froze, my breath catching in my throat as I stared at the shadowy figure looming at the foot of my bed. It didn't move, but its presence was suffocating. My mind raced with every horror movie cliché I'd ever seen, screaming at me to do something. But my body wouldn't obey. Its head tilted, as if it were studying me. Then it spoke, or at least I think it did. The words didn't come through my ears. They arrived directly in my brain, like a cold, slithering whisper. "You open the door." I blinked, and it was gone. My room was silent, but the air was still cold. My clock read 3:03 a.m. I didn't sleep for the rest of the night. The next day, I called Evan. He sounded as shaken as I felt. "Man, I don't know what's going on, but Lisa's freaking out," he said. "She said she woke up last night and saw something." "What did she see?" I asked, already knowing the answer. Evan hesitated. "She said it was a shadow in the corner of her room. It didn't move, but she felt like it was watching her." A chill ran down my spine. "Evan, we need to talk. All of us. Tonight." By evening, the four of us were back in my apartment. Nobody joked or laughed this time. The air was thick with fear and unspoken dread. Evan brought his laptop, and we started Googling everything we could about Ouija boards and paranormal experiences. "Look at this," Jake said, his voice tense. He turned the screen toward us. "It says sometimes spirits get trapped between our world and theirs. When you use a Ouija board, you might accidentally create a bridge." "That's great," Lisa said, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "How do we close it?" Jake scrolled further. "It says here that burning a board can actually make things worse. It's like destroying the bridge, but leaving the spirit stranded in our world." Everyone turned to Evan. "You burned it," Lisa hissed. "I didn't know," Evan shot back. "I thought that's what you were supposed to do." The lights flickered. We all froze. Then, a loud bang came from the kitchen. "What was that?" Lisa whispered, clutching Evan's arm. "I don't know," I said, my voice shaking. "But we're not splitting up to find out." We moved as a group, slowly making our way toward the kitchen. The air grew colder with every step. When we reached the doorway, we saw it, the Ouija board. It was sitting on the kitchen table, completely intact. "Nope, nope, nope," Jake said, backing away. "This isn't happening. We burned that thing." The planchette sat in the center of the board, and as we stared, it began to move. None of us were touching it. The wooden piece slid across the board with a slow, deliberate motion, spelling out STAY. The kitchen door slammed shut behind us. We tried the door, but it wouldn't budge. The windows wouldn't open either. The shadow reappeared, now standing in the corner of the kitchen. It was taller than before, its fingers brushing the ceiling, pointed at the board. "Do you want us to use it?" Evan asked, his voice trembling. The shadow didn't respond, but the planchette moved again. "Yes. "I don't like this," Lisa said, her voice breaking. "I don't want to do this." "We don't have a choice," I said, though I hated the words as they left my mouth. We sat around the board, our fingers trembling as we placed them on the planchette. "What do you want from us?" Jake asked. The planchette moved faster than it had before, almost frantic. "You?" "No," Lisa whispered, tears streaming down her face. "No, no, no." "What do you mean by us?" I demanded, my voice rising. "What do you want?" The shadow stretched toward us, its form distorting. The planchette spelled out one last word, LIFE. The sound of raspy breathing grew louder, closer. It was circling us, though we couldn't see a thing in the suffocating darkness. My heart pounded so hard I thought it might explode. Then, just as I felt like I couldn't take another second, the lights flickered back on. The shadow was gone. The Ouija board sat in the center of the table, the planchette still. We all stared at it, waiting for something to happen. My hands were shaking so badly I had to grip the edge of the table to keep from falling over. "What do we do?" Lisa whispered, tears streaking her face. Jake grabbed the board and threw it across the room. "We don't do anything. This thing is messing with us, and I'm not playing along anymore." "Jake!" I yelled, but it was too late. The moment the board hit the floor, the entire room shook. Cabinets flew open, dishes shattered, and the temperature dropped to freezing. A low, guttural growl echoed through the kitchen, rattling in my chest like a bass note from hell itself. The shadow reappeared, but this time it wasn't standing still. It was advancing on us, its elongated limbs stretching unnaturally as it moved. Its head tilted, and I swear I saw the glint of eyes. Cold, hollow, and endlessly dark. Then it lunged. We scattered. Evan pulled Lisa out of her chair and toward the door, but it still wouldn't budge. Jake tried breaking a window with a chair, but the glass didn't crack. I grabbed the board, desperate to stop whatever was happening. "Wait," I yelled. "What if it's the board? What if this thing is tied to it?" Evan turned to me, his face pale. "What do you mean?" "I mean, maybe we didn't close it right. Isn't that a thing? You're supposed to say goodbye or something?" Lisa sobbed. "Are you kidding me? Now you tell us this." The shadow loomed closer, its form expanding until it took up half the kitchen. I held up the board, my voice shaking. "All right, you want us to finish this? Fine." I set the board back on the table and motioned for everyone to sit. Nobody wanted to, but the shadow's oppressive presence left us no choice. We placed our trembling fingers on the planchette. "What do you want us to do?" I asked. The planchette moved immediately, faster than before. "SAYJODBYE. Goodbye," I said, my voice cracking. "Goodbye. Is that it? Are we done?" The planchette moved to yes, and the shadow froze. For a moment, everything was still. Then, the shadow began to shrink, its form folding in on itself like a collapsing star. The lights flickered violently, and a deafening roar filled the air. "Everyone say it," Evan yelled. "Goodbye," Lisa screamed. "Goodbye," Jake and I shouted in unison. The shadow vanished, and the air in the room seemed to rush back in, as if we'd been underwater and finally surfaced. The lights stabilized, and the temperature began to rise. It was over, or so we thought. In the days that followed, we all tried to move on. Evan and Lisa moved out of the apartment. Jake quit his job and moved to another state. And me? I stayed. I thought it was over. I wanted to believe it was over. But every night at 3 a.m., I wake up. The room feels colder, and for a moment, I swear I see a shadow in the corner. It doesn't move. It doesn't speak. It just watches. And I can't help but wonder, did we really close the door? Or did we just leave it open a crack? The shadow didn't disappear after that night. It stayed, lingering on the edges of my life like a dark stain that wouldn't wash out. At first, I tried to convince myself it was my imagination. Lack of sleep, stress. But deep down, I knew better. 3 weeks after the night with the Ouija board, I started noticing signs. The lights in my apartment would flicker, always at 3 a.m. My phone would buzz with notifications, but there'd be no messages. And every so often, I'd hear something, a faint scratching sound, coming from inside the walls. I told myself it was just the building settling. Rats in the walls, maybe. But one night, I got proof that it was something else. It was a Wednesday just past midnight when I heard the scratching again. Only this time it wasn't faint. It was loud, deliberate, like nails scraping against wood. I followed the sound to the hallway and saw something that made my stomach drop. There was a handprint on the wall. A single, black, greasy handprint, as though something had pressed its palm against the paint and dragged it downward. The mark wasn't there earlier, I was sure of it. I backed away, my heart racing. Then, from behind me, I heard a voice. "Still here." I spun around, but the hallway was empty. My pulse thundered in my ears as I stared into the shadows. The voice wasn't loud. It had been a whisper, faint but unmistakable. And it wasn't coming from anywhere I could see. It was coming from everywhere. The next morning, I called Evan. I hadn't spoken to him since he moved out, but I needed answers. When he picked up, his voice sounded strained. "Hey man," he said. "What's up? I need to ask you something," I said, trying to keep the panic out of my voice. "Have you noticed anything weird since we used the board?" There was a long pause on the other end of the line. Then Evan sighed. "Yeah," he said quietly. "Lisa broke up with me, said she couldn't sleep anymore. She kept waking up at 3 a.m. and seeing things. Shadows. She said I brought something into her life, and she wanted no part of it." My mouth went dry. "And you?" Evan hesitated. "I hear it, man. The scratching, the whispers. I thought it was just me going crazy, but I don't think it is. I think it's still with us." That night, I decided to confront it. Whatever it was, I couldn't keep living like this. jumping at shadows, sleeping with the lights on, dreading the moment the clock struck 3 a.m. I set up cameras in my apartment, pointed them at every corner, every dark spot. Then I sat in the living room, waiting. The lights were off, and the only sound was the faint hum of the refrigerator. I stared at the clock, watching the seconds tick closer to 3 a.m. When the moment finally came, the temperature in the room plummeted. My breath fogged in front of me, and the hairs on the back of my neck stood on end. I didn't move. I didn't even blink. And then I saw it. The shadow appeared in the corner of the room, darker than the surrounding darkness. It didn't have a face, but I could feel its gaze on me, heavy and cold. It didn't move toward me this time. Instead, it pointed at the camera. The screen on the camera flickered, and when it came back on, the shadow was gone. But the footage it captured, I wish I'd never seen it. The video showed me, sitting in the dark, staring at the shadow. But in the moments I hadn't been looking, something else had happened. The shadow wasn't alone. There were others, more of them, flickering in and out of the frame. Tall, gaunt figures with elongated limbs and hollow eyes, standing just outside my field of vision. They were everywhere, and they were getting closer. I haven't slept since that night. Every time I close my eyes, I see them. I feel them, watching, waiting, and I can't help but wonder. When we said goodbye to the board, did we banish the spirit, or did we just invite more in? The door wasn't just left open a crack. It was wide open, and now I'm not sure it can ever be closed. I couldn't stay in the apartment, not after what I saw on the footage. I packed a bag and left that same night, crashing at a motel on the edge of town. It wasn't fancy, but I didn't care. I just needed to be somewhere else, somewhere they couldn't reach me. But as the hours crept toward 3 a.m., the familiar dread settled in. The motel room felt suffocatingly small, the walls pressing in around me. I left the TV on for noise, but even that couldn't drown out the silence that seemed to crawl out of the shadows. And then, it happened again. The lights flickered. The temperature dropped. I grabbed the remote and turned up the TV, trying to drown out the sound of my own panicked breathing. But no amount of noise could hide the faint, raspy whisper that slipped through the static. "Why did you run?" I spun around, but the room was empty. The shadow wasn't there yet, but I knew it would come. They always did. Desperate, I pulled out my phone and dialed Jake. It rang twice before he picked up, his voice groggy. "Dude, do you have any idea what time it is? I need help," I said, barely able to get the words out. "They're still here, Jake. They're following me." There was a pause. Then Jake's tone shifted. "What do you mean, following? What's happening?" I explained everything, the footage, the motel, the whispering. When I finished, Jake was silent for a long time. Then he said, "We need to end this. For real this time." The next day, Jake met me at a diner just outside the city. He brought an old journal, the leather cover cracked and worn with age. "My aunt used to be into all this occult stuff," he said, flipping through the pages. "She told me once that if you ever mess with something you don't understand, you have to close the loop. Properly." "What does that mean?" I asked. "It means we need to find the original board." My stomach dropped. "We burned it." "Doesn't matter," Jake said, tapping the journal. "The energy's tied to the board. If it still exists in any form, we need to destroy it the right way." Tracking down the remains of the board wasn't easy. Evan had thrown the ashes in a dumpster behind his old apartment, and by the time we got there, the dumpster had been emptied. But Jake didn't give up. He suggested we check the landfill, and after hours of sifting through trash, we found it. A charred piece of the planchette, warped and blackened but still intact. "This is it," Jake said, holding it up like a trophy. "This is what they're tied to." "What now?" I asked, my voice shaky. Jake hesitated. "We have to finish the ritual. Close the loop." That night, we returned to the place where it all began. My apartment. It was the last thing I wanted to do, but Jake insisted it was necessary. He brought salt, candles, and a small silver knife. All things his aunt had told him could bind and banish. We set up in the living room, forming a circle with the salt and lighting the candles. Jake placed the charred planchette in the center of the circle and began chanting something in Latin. I didn't understand the words, but the air grew heavier with each one he spoke. And then the shadows came. They didn't wait this time. The moment Jake started the ritual, they appeared, dozens of them, writhing and shifting at the edges of the room. They didn't look like people anymore. They were something else entirely, their forms constantly changing, as though reality itself couldn't hold them. Jake's voice grew louder, more urgent. The shadows pressed against the circle of salt, their elongated limbs clawing at the barrier. One of them, larger than the rest, reached forward, its hand stretching impossibly long. The salt sizzled where it touched. "Keep them out," Jake yelled, shoving the silver knife into my hand. "If the circle breaks, it's over." I didn't know what to do, but instinct took over. I knelt by the circle, using the knife to redraw the salt line where it was thinning. The shadows recoiled, hissing like steam, but they didn't retreat. They kept pushing, testing every weak spot in the barrier. Jake's chant reached a crescendo, and the room shook. The shadows screamed, a high-pitched, inhuman sound that made my ears ring. Then, with a final shout, Jake plunged the knife into the charred planchette. The shadows froze. For a moment, everything was still. Then, one by one, they began to dissolve, their forms unraveling into wisps of smoke. The largest shadow lingered the longest, its hollow eyes locked on mine. It didn't scream or lunge. It just stared, as if committing me to memory. Then it was gone. The room fell silent. Jake slumped to the floor, breathing heavily. "It's done," he said. "The loop is closed." "Are you sure?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Jake nodded. "They're gone. For good this time. It's been months since that night. The shadows haven't returned, and for the first time in what feels like forever, I can sleep through the night. But sometimes, when I'm alone, I still feel like I'm being watched. And every so often, at 3 a.m., I wake up. Not because of fear or cold, but because of a single thought that won't leave my mind. What if we missed one? For months, I thought it was over. The shadows were gone. The air in my apartment felt lighter, and my nightmares had subsided. Life went back to something resembling normal. But as you can probably guess, peace like that never lasts. Started small, as these things always do. A light flickering here, a cold spot in the hallway there. I told myself it was nothing. Buildings settle, wires short out, perfectly logical explanations. But deep down, I knew better. The shadows were patient. They waited, and then they made their move. It happened on a stormy night, of course, because these things have a flair for the dramatic. The rain hammered against my windows, and thunder shook the walls. I was on the couch, half asleep, when the TV cut out, replaced by static. At first, I thought it was just the storm interfering with the signal. Then the static stopped, and a single image appeared on the screen. The charred planchette. My stomach dropped. The screen flickered, and words began to form, one letter at a time, as if they were being typed by an unseen hand. Einthompelit. My breath caught in my throat. I wanted to look away, but I couldn't. The TV screen flickered again, and the image of the planchette was replaced by something far worse. A shadow. But it wasn't the ones from before. This one was different, bigger, stronger. Its form shifted and twisted, refusing to settle into anything recognizable. Then the screen went black, and the room plunged into silence. The air grew colder. My breath fogged in front of me, and the hairs on the back of my neck stood on end. I turned slowly, every nerve in my body screaming at me not to. It was there. The shadow loomed in the corner of the room, its hollow eyes glowing faintly. It didn't move, but its presence was overwhelming, like gravity pressing down on me. My mind raced, trying to make sense of what was happening. I thought we'd ended this. I thought the loop was closed. Apparently, we were wrong. I grabbed my phone and called Jake. The line rang once, twice, 3 times before he picked up. "What's going on?" he asked, his voice groggy. "It's back," I said, trying to keep the panic out of my voice. "Something's still here." Jake was silent for a moment. Then he cursed under his breath. "I was afraid of this." "What do you mean?" I demanded. "You said we closed the loop." "I thought we did," Jake said. "But maybe we missed something. Maybe there's another piece of the board. Something we didn't destroy." I felt a chill run down my spine. "How do we find it?" Jake hesitated. "There's someone who might know." The next morning, Jake and I drove out of town to meet the one person he thought could help. His aunt, the woman who had taught him about closing loops and binding spirits. She lived in a small cabin deep in the woods, the kind of place you only see in horror movies. Her name was Miriam, and she greeted us with a knowing look, as if she'd been expecting us. "You've stirred something ancient," she said as soon as we walked in. Her voice was low and raspy, like dry leaves rustling in the wind. "And it doesn't like being unfinished." "What do we do?" I asked, cutting straight to the point. "How do we end this for good?" Miriam motioned for us to sit. She placed a bundle of herbs into a clay bowl and lit them, the smoke curling upward in intricate patterns. "The spirit is tied to what remains of the board," she said. "If you want to banish it, you must find every piece and destroy them in the proper way." She handed us a list of instructions. "Burn sage and salt together. Draw protective symbols in ash. Say a specific incantation while destroying the pieces. And one more thing," she said, her eyes locking onto mine. "The spirit will try to stop you. It will use fear, doubt, and anger against you. Do not let it break the circle, no matter what." Jake and I left her cabin with a newfound sense of dread. The storm wasn't over, it was just beginning. Back in town, we retraced our steps, searching for any trace of the board. It took days, but we finally found the last piece. An unburned fragment of the board, hidden in the landfill under layers of trash. The second I touched it, the air grew colder, and the shadows began to stir again. We returned to my apartment that night, armed with Miriam's instructions. The salt circle was drawn, the herbs were burning, and the fragment of the board sat in the center. Jake began the incantation, his voice steady despite the tremble in his hands. The shadows didn't waste time. They appeared instantly, their forms swirling like smoke, pressing against the edges of the circle. One of them lunged, its claw-like hand reaching for Jake's face. But the salt held, sizzling where the shadow touched it. "Keep going," I shouted, reinforcing the circle with more ash. Jake's voice rose, louder and more commanding. The shadows screamed, their forms distorting and collapsing in on themselves. One by one, they vanished except for the largest one, the one from the TV. It stepped forward, its hollow eyes locked onto mine. I could feel its anger, its hatred, but I didn't back down. Jake finished the incantation, and I threw the last piece of the board into the flames. The shadow let out a deafening roar, its form disintegrating into a whirlwind of black smoke. The room shook violently, and for a moment, I thought the circle wouldn't hold. But then, everything went still. The shadows were gone. For good this time. It's been weeks since that night, and the shadows haven't returned. The air feels lighter, and I finally sleep without waking at 3 a.m. But sometimes, when the wind howls or the lights flicker, I wonder, did we truly finish it, or did we just buy ourselves some time? Because if I've learned one thing, it's this: once you open the door, it's never fully closed. Weeks turned into months, and I convinced myself the nightmare was over. The shadows were gone, the board was destroyed, and for the first time in nearly a year, I felt like I could breathe. Jake and I stopped talking about what happened, like it was some unspoken pact. If we didn't acknowledge it, maybe it would stay buried. But the thing about buried things is they have a way of clawing back to the surface. It was late one night, maybe 2 in the morning, when my phone buzzed on the nightstand. I groaned, reaching for it, thinking it was some spam call or a late-night text from Jake. Instead, it was a voicemail. There was no number, just the word, unknown. A chill crept up my spine as I hit play. At first, it was static, crackling and hissing like a bad radio signal. But then I heard it, a voice, faint, distorted, but unmistakably familiar. "You think it's over, I froze, the phone slipping from my hand. My heart was pounding in my ears as I stared at the screen. The voicemail replaying in my head. Couldn't be. Couldn't. But I knew that voice. I'd heard it before, whispered in the darkness, echoing in my nightmares. The next day, I called Jake. He didn't pick up. I texted him. No response. Panic started to creep in, the kind that turns your stomach into a pit of ice. I drove to his place, but when I got there, the house was dark. No car in the driveway. No answer at the door. Jake was gone. Desperate, I called Miriam. She picked up on the second ring, her voice calm and steady as always. "It's back," I said, trying to keep my voice from shaking. "I don't know how, but it's back." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. When she finally spoke, her words sent a chill through me. "I warned you," she said. "It never truly goes away. The door you opened isn't just a portal. It's a pathway. And the thing about pathways is, others can follow." "What do I do?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Miriam sighed. "You can't destroy the door. Not completely. But you can lock it. One last time." She told me I'd need to return to where it all started. The attic where Evan had found the board. "The connection was strongest there," she said. "If you want to seal it, that's the only place you can do it." I didn't want to go. Every part of me screamed to leave it alone, to run as far as I could and never look back. But I knew I couldn't. Not if there was a chance of stopping this for good. So I called Evan. He was reluctant to help. Understandably so. But I convinced him. We met at his uncle's old house, the place where the nightmare began. The attic was just as I remembered it. Dusty, cluttered, and heavy with a sense of foreboding. We set up the circle just like before. Salt, candles, the works. Miriam had given me a new incantation, one she said would lock the pathway and sever the connection to whatever was on the other side. Evan was visibly nervous, his hands shaking as he lit the last candle. "You sure this is going to work?" he asked. "No," I admitted, "but it's the only chance we've got." The moment we started the ritual, the air changed. It grew heavier, colder, and the faint smell of sulfur filled the room. The shadows didn't wait this time. They appeared almost immediately, more of them than I'd ever seen before. They swirled around the edges of the attic, their hollow eyes glowing in the flickering candlelight. "Keep going," I yelled as Evan faltered. "Don't stop." He nodded, his voice trembling as he continued the chant. The shadows pressed against the circle, their forms twisting and writhing like smoke caught in a storm. I could feel their anger, their hatred, as they clawed at the barrier. And then the largest shadow appeared. It was the one from before, the one I'd seen on the TV. Its presence was overwhelming, filling the attic with a suffocating darkness. It didn't try to break the circle. Instead, it stepped inside. The candles flickered violently, the flames threatening to go out. The air grew colder, and my breath came in short, panicked gasps. The shadow loomed over us, its form towering and monstrous. "You can't stop me," it said, its voice echoing in my mind. "This door will never close." "Yes, it will," I said, forcing the words out through clenched teeth. I grabbed the silver knife from the floor and stepped forward, my hands shaking. "This ends now." The shadow laughed, a deep, guttural sound that made my skin crawl. "You think you're stronger than me?" it said, its voice dripping with malice. "You're nothing." But I didn't stop. I plunged the knife into the center of the circle, the blade slicing through the salt and ash. The shadows screamed, their forms collapsing into smoke. The air filled with a deafening roar as the largest shadow began to unravel, its form twisting and shrinking until it was nothing but a faint wisp. And then it was gone. The attic fell silent. The candles burned steady, their flames no longer flickering. The air felt lighter, the oppressive weight lifted. Evan looked at me, his face pale but relieved. "Is it over?" he asked. I nodded, though I wasn't entirely sure. "It's locked," I said. "For now. It's been weeks since that night, and the shadows haven't returned. The door is closed, the pathway sealed. But I can't shake the feeling that it's not over. Because sometimes, late at night, I still hear the faintest whisper in the dark. Soon, after the attic ritual, life settled into an uneasy calm. I moved to a new apartment, changed my number, and tried to leave everything behind. Evan and I promised not to talk about it again, as if ignoring it would make it stay buried. Jake was still missing, but I convinced myself he just wanted a clean break from the madness. Denial was my only refuge. For a while, it worked. No flickering lights, no cold spots, no shadows. But the silence didn't bring comfort. It felt like a countdown. The calm before the storm. I didn't know it yet, but the storm was already here. It was a cold winter night, months after the attic. I was walking home from work, the snow crunching under my boots, when I felt it. The unmistakable sensation of being watched. My breath hung in the air, visible in the streetlights, and every shadow seemed darker than it should have been. I quickened my pace, glancing over my shoulder, but the street was empty. Still, the feeling didn't leave. It followed me all the way home. When I stepped inside my apartment, the air was frigid, like the heat had been off all day. I checked the thermostat, it was working fine. That was the first red flag. The second came when I walked into the living room and saw something sitting on my coffee table. It was the charred planchette. My knees nearly buckled. I'd seen it burn to ash. I felt it crumble. Yet here it was, whole and intact. The wood blackened and warped, but unmistakably real. I didn't touch it. Couldn't. I just stood there, staring, my chest tightening with panic. And then the whisper came. You thought you could lock me out. The lights flickered, and the shadows in the room shifted. They weren't just shadows anymore. They were alive, writhing and twisting along the walls, pooling in the corners. The largest one emerged from the hallway, its form impossibly tall and jagged. You didn't close the door, it said, its voice a guttural growl that rattled the windows. You just delayed the inevitable. I backed away, my heart pounding in my chest. What do you want? I shouted. The shadow laughed, a deep, echoing sound. To finish what you started. The planchette slid across the table, moving on its own. It spelled out a single word, L-I-F-E. I knew what it meant. It wasn't just after me. It wanted everyone who had been part of the ritual. Everyone who had touched that board. Jake, Evan, Lisa. It wouldn't stop until it had us all. But I wasn't going to let that happen. I grabbed my phone and called Evan. He picked up after the first ring, his voice panicked. It's back, isn't it? He said before I could say a word. Yeah, I said, my voice trembling. We need to end this. For real this time. We met at Miriam's cabin in the woods. She greeted us with a grim expression, as if she'd known we'd be back. It's stronger now, she said. The bond is deeper. Closing the door won't be enough. You'll have to destroy the pathway entirely. How? Evan asked, his voice tight with fear. Miriam led us to the back of the cabin, where a fire pit was already burning. She handed me a small, iron box covered in intricate carvings. This is a binding vessel, she said. Place the planchette inside and seal it with your blood. Then cast it into the fire. That's it, I asked, doubt creeping into my voice. Miriam shook her head. No, the spirit will fight back. It will do everything in its power to stop you. You must not waver. We prepared the ritual, drawing protective symbols around the fire pit and placing the planchette in the iron box. As I pricked my finger and let the blood drip onto the carvings, the air grew heavier, colder. The shadows appeared, swirling around us like a storm. The largest shadow stepped forward, its form towering and menacing. You can't destroy me, it growled. I am eternal. Not anymore, I said, my voice steady despite the fear clawing at my chest. I cast the iron box into the fire. The shadows screamed, their forms writhing and twisting as the fire consumed the box. The air was filled with the sound of cracking wood and a deafening roar that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. The largest shadow lunged at the fire, its form disintegrating as it got closer. With one final, ear-splitting scream, It collapsed into itself, vanishing in a burst of ash and smoke. Then silence. The air felt lighter. The oppressive weight was gone. Miriam smiled faintly, her eyes reflecting the dying embers. "It's over," she said. "The pathway is destroyed." Evan and I exchanged a look, relief washing over us. For the first time in months, I felt like I could breathe again. It's been a year since that night, and the shadows haven't returned. The whispers are gone, the cold spots, the flickering lights. All of it. Life feels normal again. But sometimes, late at night, I dream of the shadows. I see them writhing in the darkness, clawing at the edges of my mind. And when I wake up, I hear a faint whisper. So quiet I almost think I imagined it. Eternal. Maybe it's just my imagination. Or maybe some doors can never truly be destroyed, only hidden, waiting for the right moment to reopen.